Hello YouTube, and I should say hello Bitchute, since I now have a channel over there as well. I've had it for a little while, but I haven't mentioned it before because I was waiting until there was some content up there. So if you're on Bitchute, have a look. You'll find a link below to my Bitchute account, and feel free to subscribe to me. Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2019. I'm sure it's going to be a big year, as always. And I'm starting off the year by asking a question. I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. Imagine there was a building in America, so let's say a government building, for example, and there was a bombing at this building. Dozens and dozens of people were badly injured, many people were killed, and of course the media went crazy, as they normally would in a situation like this. And within hours of this happening, eyewitnesses were saying that they saw a man with a backpack enter the building shortly before the explosion, and the man appeared to be of Middle Eastern background. Now, there's no evidence that this man actually existed or was of Middle Eastern background, or what he had in the backpack. Who knows? But Fox News decided to run with this and create the narrative that the building was blown up by Muslim extremists. This became their war cry, I guess you could call it. And they did story after story about Muslim terrorists being a danger, and that clearly this is an act of terrorism. How could anyone doubt that this is an act of terrorism? Who else could have done it? Clearly, it's the Muslim terrorists who are responsible, despite the fact that there's no real evidence, just a couple of eyewitness accounts. Now, imagine this scenario happened. I now want you to imagine, what would the Young Turks' response be? Do you think they would agree with Fox News? Or do you think they would be amongst their biggest critics? Do you think they would be saying, we can't jump to conclusions that it was a Muslim terrorist? We don't know who this man was. We don't know if he was a Muslim or of Middle Eastern background. We don't know what he had in the backpack. We should wait until we have more facts. And you know what? That they would be right in that situation. Yet the Young Turks are rather famous for their double standards, because I have no doubt they would hold Fox responsible under those circumstances. Yet under similar circumstances, where the races are a bit different, the Young Turks don't hold themselves to the same standards. I'm of course talking about the Jazmine Barnes case. No doubt you've all heard of it. Tragically, a couple of weeks ago, a young girl was shot in a car with her family and died on the scene. Now, I'm not a parent, I don't have kids, but I can imagine that losing a child must be the worst possible thing you can go through. And I think anyone with any kind of empathy who isn't a sociopath can understand that and can empathise and understand how tragic it is that such a young girl who really didn't have a chance to live her life was so tragically killed. Unfortunately, some people just see this as an opportunity to get some political mileage out of it, essentially using the death of a young girl for their own political gain. Now, I don't want this to be a criticism just of the Young Turks, although a large part of this video is going to be just that. This is, in fact, a criticism of the media in general, and although I love the internet, and I think the internet is an amazing thing, and in some ways has improved journalism, in many ways it's made it worse. In the olden days, before the internet was such a big thing, news programs and newspapers were all published roughly the same time. You had your nightly news roughly the same time. Papers were usually published in the morning, and this actually gave journalists some time to, research some facts and actually write a story without jumping to conclusions. Now, I'm not saying that never happened, but it's a bit different than today, where everything is pretty much instant. There's a shooting going on somewhere, and you will find people will be tweeting about it as it's going on, And by the time the thing's all over, we already have articles up on the internet talking about it from every conceivable angle. And I don't have a problem with news outlets reporting news as it happens, as long as they stick to the facts. Unfortunately, they don't tend to do that. Often there's very few facts, and they tend to fill in the gaps with their own ideology, and they then conclude that whichever group they particularly dislike, be it Muslims or men's rights activists or white people in general, they are the ones who are responsible, even though there's absolutely no evidence to support any of that. I'm an atheist, so I'm very familiar with the term God of the Gaps. What God of the Gaps basically means is when a fundamentalist Christian can't explain a certain thing, they tend to say, well, God did it. It's a very simplistic explanation which doesn't really explain anything. And I feel a lot of journalists do a very similar thing when they're missing facts. They fill in the gaps with their own ideology. We could call it the ideology of the gaps, in fact. Actually, that's a pretty good name for this video. So, yes, young Jasmine Barnes was tragically shot in a drive-by shooting, and a lot of news outlets jumped to the conclusion that it was a white male. Now, there is a reason why they jumped to this conclusion. That is because Jasmine's mother and some other eyewitnesses claimed they saw a white male drive off in a pickup truck. Now, they didn't see him fire the gun. That's an important part of this story. They just saw him drive off and concluded that it must have been the white male. Now, we know that eyewitnesses tend not to be too reliable, and just because the white male was driving off doesn't mean necessarily that he pulled the trigger. But despite this, numerous news outlets, including the Young Turks, jumped to the conclusion that the white male must have been responsible. Not only was he responsible, but it was also racially motivated. Now, how you would come to that conclusion is beyond me. I mean, sure, if the white male had have pulled the trigger, there is the possibility that it might have been racially motivated, but there's no evidence to support that, apart from the races of the people involved. So once again, this is the ideology of the gaps, filling in the blanks with your own ideology. Basically, the assumption that whenever a crime is committed against a black person by a white person, the one and only motivation has to be racism. This is really no different than seeing a person who might be of Middle Eastern background with a backpack a short time before a bombing and concluding that he was a Muslim and this is Muslim terrorism. Absolutely no different. And of course we got articles like this one by Nigel Roberts. White man who shot Jazmine Barnes may have killed other black people. Okay, well, first of all, you don't know who pulled the trigger, and now we're concluding that this suspect may have killed other black people as well. Yep, that seems reasonable, doesn't it? The first paragraph reads, the white man who killed 7-year-old Jasmine Barnes Sunday in a Houston drive-by shooting may have killed other black people, civil rights attorney Lee Merritt tweeted on Tuesday. Yes, we'll get back to Lee Merritt in a little while. So not only is this white man guilty of pulling the trigger, and not only do these people know without a doubt that it was racially motivated, but they also think that he may have done this before, even though we know absolutely nothing about this suspect, apart from the fact that he's white and drives a red pickup truck. And I'm sure he's part of the alt-right and a Trump supporter as well. Probably an MRA as well. I haven't done a search, but I'm sure there is someone on the internet claiming somewhere that the white suspect was a men's rights activist, because why not, right? That's the state we're at the moment. Just make it up. It doesn't matter. It's all fucking propaganda. Now, where this story blew up in the face of the Young Turks and many other journalists who are very fond of ideology of the gaps, is it turns out that the white suspect wasn't guilty at all. He was just trying to get away from a shooting, apparently, when he drove off. It turns out that the shooters were two young black men. And the reason for the shooting was they assumed that the car Jasmine was in belonged to someone from a rival gang. So let's have a look at how the Young Turks responded to this news.
Prosecutors in Texas have identified two suspects in the drive-by shooting of a 7-year-old Jazmine Barnes. She unfortunately did not survive the shooting, and there was a huge question as to what the motive was, who the suspect was. Turns out that there are two suspects, and even though the family believed that they had witnessed a white man as the suspect, and there were also 4 other witnesses who had said the same thing, prosecutors said that that was not the actual suspect. It was a case of mistaken identity. So who are the suspects? Well, according to the prosecutors, one of those suspects is Eric Black Jr. There he is, arrested, and he does not match the witness photo at all. So let's look at the witness illustration of what the alleged suspect looked like. And it's a side-by-side of that photo, or that drawing, I should say, with Eric Black Jr. Okay, so there it is.
No, it is. None of that matters.
Yeah.
The original guy that they had in the red trunk, it was just wrong. It wasn't him. Mm-hmm. So let me explain that in greater detail and then tell you who broke the case. Well, I'll tell you that right now. It was Sean King.
Now, Sean King didn't really get what he was expecting, though, did he? So let's look at this reward. The reward of $100,000 for information was offered by Sean King and civil rights attorney Lee Merritt. Now, I mentioned Lee Merritt just before when I was reading from another article. Lee Merritt is the one that said that the white man who killed the 7-year-old black girl has probably killed other black people before. I wonder if there was some racial motivation for offering this reward. Not that they were overly concerned about a young girl being killed, but maybe because they had some kind of political agenda. I wonder if it was a black guy shooting at a random car, killing, say, a white girl or a white boy or an Asian child or whatever. I wonder if they would have offered the same reward. Yeah, I somehow don't think so. Their whole motivation is built upon the assumption that this was an act of racism by a white towards a black.
So I'll give you the details on that in a second as well. So first of all, as Anna pointed out, everybody originally thinks it's the white guy in his 40s in the red truck. Why? The family, when they recovered for half a second from the shooting and looked up, saw the red truck going away, and they thought it was him. And they weren't alone. As Anna pointed out, four other witnesses said it was the white guy in the red truck, okay?
Now, all this is true, but this doesn't excuse the media jumping on the racist bandwagon, the anti-white bandwagon, and filling in the gaps with their own ideology. Yes, it is true, a white man was seen speeding away. That doesn't mean he did it, and it doesn't mean he did it because he's a racist. Yet we get headlines like this from Salon. Was Jazmine Barnes a victim of domestic terrorism? I don't know. Is it still domestic terrorism now, I wonder, that we know who really did it? Will white America own it? Well, I don't think white America will somehow. Will black America own it, now that we know what actually happened? Probably not. Will America confront racist domestic terror, or will Jasmine's killer be seen as yet another deranged loner? That is an interesting question.
Now, how did they find out that it wasn't? Because, in fact, one of the witnesses tailed the guy in the red truck. I mean, that's how positive the other people on the road were that it was the guy in the red truck. Now, the way that they got to the truth was Sean King, who was an activist, put out a reward to find the guy who did it. It started at $35,000, then it went to $50,000, then it went to $100,000, and finally they got a tip. And it went to Sean King, and then Sean King brought it to the police. Turns out it wasn't the guy in the red truck at all. It was a different car, and everybody was so shaken by what happened, they didn't realize which car it was. Now, how did they know that it was Eric Black Jr. and his, he's the driver and the guy who actually did the shooting? Well, because Eric Black Jr. has not only confessed it, but said, yeah, I didn't do the shooting. The guy next to me did the shooting. And by the way, you could find the gun in my apartment, and I give you permission to search the apartment. They went and searched the apartment, and they found the gun that matches the shell casings. It's definitely Eric Black Jr. As far as we can tell, they got to go through trial, of course, etc. So it was, and it turns out they had the wrong car. They thought they were shooting at a rival gang or something along those lines, and they shot into the wrong car.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how true that is. Now, I don't have any positive information, but I'm very suspicious about a couple of gangbangers being out at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, shooting up supposed rivals. I suspect there may be more to this case than we presently know. Now, I can't say that for sure, but there is a lot about this case which is very, very suspicious.
By the way, a good reason not to shoot into random cars, okay, or into any cars. So I think Sean King should deserve tremendous credit for this story.
Really, Cenk? Is that what you believe, is it? Well, let's go back to the scenario I gave you at the start of this video. You know, where the government building had been bombed, and some people said they saw a guy who looked kind of Middle Eastern going into the building shortly beforehand with a backpack on. Now, let's say after that happened and Fox was reporting everywhere that it's clearly Muslim terrorism, blah, blah, blah. Let's say the KKK came forward and offered $100,000 for information on this dirty Muslim terrorist, because we all know who did it. And then, surprisingly, we find out that there's some more information. Apparently, the guy who was walking into the building with the backpack on not only wasn't Muslim, but he wasn't even Middle Eastern. He was just a normal guy. He's not part of any terrorist group or anything like that. And it turns out that the bombing was actually done by white supremacists. Now, my question is, would Cenk be calling the KKK heroes for offering the reward because it led to that information? Or would he be abusing them for offering the reward because clearly there is a racist political motivation behind it? I wonder which one that would be.
Because if it wasn't for his offers of figuring it out who the culprits were, they might not have ever gotten that tip.
Might, right, Cenk? Might. Now, look, even if the reward that Sean King posted did lead to the tip which led to the arrest, that doesn't excuse his motivation. Okay, it's an accident that it turned out the way it did. It was not his intention. He was expecting to have a white guy to point the finger at and use as a political tool to push his own agenda forward. And it all blew up in his face. Now, fortunately for everyone else, it may have led to the capture of the actual killers. That does not make him a hero, though, Cenk. That makes him a fucking idiot. We just happen to benefit from his idiocy.
Okay, now, a lot of the right wing say, oh, Sean King has an agenda. Well, it's not wrong to have an agenda. It's wrong to skew the facts to fit your agenda.
Okay, we agree then, Cenk. Why exactly do you do that then? Why is it that you and the other Young Turks and Sean King jump to conclusions and twist facts and fill in the gaps with your own ideology? Yeah, it's almost like you've got an agenda to push, right? And by the way, it's not just the right wing which are criticising Sean King. I'm not right wing. I'm a centrist. And that doesn't mean I agree with extremist left-wing racists.
And Sean did not do that. Now, we'll get to his agenda in a second, but when he got the information that it was two black guys who did it instead of a white guy, he turned it into the cops, and they got the real guys who did it.
Right.
Now, he really only had two options, didn't he? The first option was to hand over the information, which he did, and he would have known that when he was doing this, it would be incredibly embarrassing for him. Because there would be people like myself making videos like this one, criticising him for making such an idiotic mistake and jumping to conclusions when there wasn't any evidence. Now, the second option is he could have sat on the information. He could have not turned it over to the police. Now, could you imagine what would happen when the information came out anyway, which I'm sure it would have, and we found out that he sat on it, that he didn't give it to the police? It would have been even worse for him. But either way, it doesn't excuse the fact that he had an agenda, that he jumped to conclusions, that he had no reason to believe that the shooting was in any way racially motivated. Yet that is what he promoted, and he was 100% fucking wrong, wasn't he?
Right.
Isn't that how it's supposed to work? I think the entire country, let alone the left wing, the right wing, etc., should be thanking Sean King for solving the case. Certainly the family is. The family's like, look, all we cared about was getting justice, and it turns out these guys did it. We fought. We got the real guys who did it. Justice. Thank you.
So the second suspect has been identified by prosecutors as Larry Woodruff, and that is the individual who allegedly fired the gun. And so it's interesting because the sheriff's office didn't want to name him, but prosecutors have put his information out there. Investigators are still looking for the driver of the red pickup truck reported at the scene. They don't believe that the driver, described as a white man in his 40s, or the truck were involved in the shooting, despite previous reports suggesting that racism had played a role in Jasmine's death.
So, and by the way, all credit to also everybody that contributed to that fund, including Houston Texans star DeAndre Hopkins, who gave his playoff check excuse me, there's two different funds. DeAndre Hopkins gave to the GoFundMe fund to fund the funeral for the family, because the family does not have a lot of money, and obviously they were grief-stricken, etc. So wonderful job by all those people to arrive at the right answer. In fact, I want to quote the family lawyer. He said they wanted the right person to be convicted, not a white person.
Yes, it is true. Lee Merritt, the lawyer for the family, did say they wanted the right person to be convicted, not a white person. But he said that after we found out it was two black guys who did it. Before we found that out, he was convinced that it was the white guy who did it, even though no one saw him pull the trigger. And he's also the guy who said that this guy was most likely responsible for other black deaths. So just a little bit wrong there, Lee. Lee had also tweeted just over a week ago, "Stopped by the barbershop to get a cut. The topic of Jazmine Barnes came up. A little girl in Houston killed by a drive-by. That is not what happened. A white terrorist ambushed a family, riddling their car with bullets and killing a 7-year-old girl without any provocation." Yep. I think it's safe to say that Lee Merritt, along with Sean King, were both using the death of this young girl for their own political ends. And when he said they wanted the right person to be convicted, not a white person, that's what we call damage control. Now, if he had have said that before we found out it was two black guys, that would be a different thing, wouldn't it? But that's not what happened, is it, Jenk?
Right? Of course, their 7-year-old daughter was shot. Of course they want to find out who the right person was. So now, as to the alleged Shaun King agenda, some people say, well, look, Shaun doesn't look into every murder in the country. He only looks into these cases where it looks like a white racist might have shot an African American. Yeah, that's right. It's not his job to be the cop for the whole country. Nobody elected him to do that. It's like saying, oh, I guess you only care about the Klan murders of black people, but you don't care about other murders. No, I care about other murders, but yeah, I'm going to chase down the Klan murders. That's my agenda. And if you lived back then, that would have been a great agenda. I wish everybody had that agenda back then.
Okay, I mean, we can play that game when it comes to anything. For all the idiots out there who pretend like they care about the Armenian genocide, right, which we've talked about on the show on a regular basis and have acknowledged it on a regular basis. You guys care about the genocide of the Rohingya Muslims? Have you guys been going off on that? You care about what's happening to the Yemeni children right now? The tens of thousands of them who have already died and the millions of them who could lose their lives in coming months because of the famine there? Do they care about that? No, they don't. So,
and unlike Shaun, you do not stick to the truth.
Exactly.
And you don't care about justice. It's just a political trick or a game for you guys. Shaun instead found the real culprit and helped to bring out justice.
Okay, I can understand that an activist shouldn't be expected to comment on everything out there. You know, obviously, if you're focusing on one particular group of people and their rights or their struggles or whatever, that's fine. I can accept that. But where you cross the line is when you use the death of a young girl to spread hate. And I think it's pretty clear that Shaun King really wasn't all that concerned about the death of a child. It was about the death of a black child, supposedly at the hands of a white person. That was more important to him than the fact that a child had died. Now, if it was proven that a white racist had gone out of his way to kill a black child because he hates blacks or whatever, yep, by all means, Shaun King and the Young Turks and the media should be publicizing that, and they should be talking about it, and they should be condemning the guy. But instead, what we got was some eyewitnesses saying that a white guy was in the vicinity driving away, and then the political opportunists jumping on the racist bandwagon, the anti-white bandwagon, to push their agenda. And the fact that a young girl had been killed became secondary. It just became a tool for them to use. That's where the issue is.
That Houston shooting that killed a 7-year-old girl. This morning, police are trying to determine whether it's linked to a previous shooting in the same area as they track down the gunman whose pickup truck was caught on surveillance camera. ABC's Will Carr is on the case.
Hold on, Jazz.
Overnight, for the first time, we're seeing a playful Jasmine Barnes. That's the smile of an innocent 7-year-old girl. A life ripped from her family far too soon. The search for her killer now intensifying.
We're not ruling anything out. We take very serious what's occurring. We're not tone deaf to some of the concerns in our community where these could be potentially race-related.
Authorities say Jasmine's mother was driving in West Houston to get coffee with her 4 daughters in their car Sunday morning when, unprovoked, a man in a red pickup truck pulled up and started shooting into their car.
He intentionally killed my child for no reason.
Police releasing this surveillance picture. The suspect described as a white male in his 40s with a beard, last seen wearing a red hoodie. With tips pouring in, police say they're ramping up patrols in the area. The devastation affecting more than just the local community. Celebrities now pleading for help. Actress Gabrielle Union tweeting, "Find him. This evil monster must be stopped." And Olivia Wilde, "Please help find this murderer if you can."
With all the national attention, there's now a $75,000 award. Some members in this community are questioning if the attack was racially motivated. Authorities say they're looking into that. They also say they're taking a second look at a shooting that took place back in 2017 to see if there's any connections. Robin.
Hopefully they'll get some results very soon.